Why did the room laugh when she finally spoke? The sound hit first, sharp, careless, confident. Laughter from people who already believed they understood the story. Briana Anderson stood at the defendant's table and waited for it to pass. She didn't lower her eyes, didn't shift her weight, didn't tighten her jaw. She had learned long ago that stillness unnerved people more than defiance. Across the room, Admiral Marcus Donovan leaned back in his chair like a man watching theater. 2 stars on his collar, 30 years of combat experience, a career built on being listened to the moment he opened his mouth. "If you were an officer," he said, voice smooth, practiced, sharp enough to cut without raising it, "your rank would be Captain Photocopy." The room erupted again. JAG officers laughed. One laughed too loud. Another covered his mouth, pretending not to enjoy it. Even the court reporter's shoulders shook. Briana didn't react. She had expected this part. She wore a gray blazer, plain, unremarkable, the kind of clothing meant to disappear into office hallways. Her hair was pulled back tight, not out of respect, but because loose hair had once gotten someone killed. No uniform. No rank. No visible authority. Just a woman everyone thought they already understood. The charges had been read an hour earlier. Fraud against the United States, unauthorized transfer of military property, espionage, hinted at but not yet spoken to loudly. Millions of dollars in weapons gone. Her credentials used. Her signature stamped neatly across every document. The prosecution had painted her as simple, careless, greedy, a civilian who thought no one would notice what happened in logistics. A perfect scapegoat. Admiral Donovan expected tears, or anger, or a breakdown he could later describe as guilt. Instead, she met his eyes. Not with challenge, not with fear, with something colder. "Higher than yours, sir," she said quietly. "You just don't know it yet." For one fragile heartbeat, the laughter stopped. It wasn't respect that filled the silence, it was confusion. Then the room laughed harder. Someone shook their head, someone else muttered, "Delusional." The prosecutor smiled like a man who had just been handed a gift. Only one person didn't laugh. Master Chief Raymond Garrett sat in the advisory row, hands folded, posture relaxed in a way that came only after decades of violence. He wasn't watching her face. He was watching her breathing. 4 seconds in. 4 seconds held. 4 seconds out. Perfect. Garrett felt a familiar tightening in his chest. He had seen that rhythm in firefights, in bomb disposal, in places where panic got people killed. Not in secretaries. The hearing continued. Evidence stacked neatly on the projection screen. Login times, IP addresses, digital signatures traced to her desk computer, financial deposits into an offshore-linked account under her name. Every slide landed with the confidence of inevitability. "Yes," she said when asked if it was her username. "Yes," when asked about the IP address. "Yes," when asked about the digital signature. No hesitation, no denial. The prosecutor paused, letting the silence swell. "So you admit," he said, "that you authorized the transfer of these weapons?" "I admit my credentials were used." A subtle distinction, lost on most of the room. Garrett's eyes narrowed. When asked for evidence in her defense, Briana didn't raise her voice. She didn't plead. "I request access to the full chain of custody logs," she said. "Both layers." The prosecutor objected immediately. She didn't have clearance. She was a civilian. This was a stalling tactic. She cited the regulation by number, subsection included, word for word. The judge hesitated. The Admiral leaned forward now, interest replacing amusement. Garrett wrote a single line in his notepad. "Not guessing." The court recessed. Briana was escorted down a side corridor by two security personnel who walked close but didn't touch her. One was barely 20. The other had the look of someone who followed orders without asking why. She moved smoothly, no wasted motion, weight balanced on the balls of her feet. Garrett watched her go. In the holding room, concrete walls hummed softly under fluorescent lights. A camera blinked red in the corner. She sat with her hands flat on the metal table. 4 in. 4 hold. 4 out. In the hallway outside, a young IT petty officer named Dylan Chase stared at his laptop. The fingerprint scan had gone through. Basic file loaded first. Admin secretary. GS-level pay. Clean record. Then, for just a second, something deeper flashed across his screen. Commander. Naval Special Warfare. Restricted clearance. Before the system locked him out completely. His hands shook. That designation wasn't just rare, it was protected, buried, the kind of file you didn't accidentally see. Either the system was broken, or the entire courtroom was wrong. By early afternoon, something shifted. An NCIS agent pulled Briana's file and hit classification walls that didn't exist for civilians. Master Chief Garrett's unease hardened into certainty. She wasn't panicking. She was waiting. When the hearing resumed, the prosecutor moved quickly, eager to close. The evidence was overwhelming, the narrative clean. That's when Briana spoke again. "I request a full system audit," she said. "Access logs for all personnel with procurement authority." The word all landed like a dropped weapon. Including flag officers. The judge called for review. Minutes later, alarms blared. Red lights flooded the hallways, magnetic locks engaged, doors sealed. A voice echoed over the intercom, calm and final. Security protocol engaged. Panic followed. People pulled phones, demanded answers, looked for exits that wouldn't open. In the holding room, Briana stood. Not hurried, not startled. Right on time. She stepped into the hallway as chaos rippled outward. An NCIS agent stared at her. "You knew," the agent said. Briana didn't smile. "I knew someone would panic," she replied. "And panic makes people sloppy." Somewhere in the building, someone was already trying to erase their tracks. And for the first time since the morning laughter, the power in the room had shifted. Not with noise. Not with rank. But with patience. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It waits. And then it acts. Why did the alarm stop? But the fear did. The silence after the lockdown was worse than the noise. Red lights still washed the hallways, but the initial panic had settled into something colder, quieter. People weren't running anymore. They were watching doors, watching each other, watching the blinking cameras in the corners like they might blink back. Briana stood near the holding room doorway, hands relaxed at her sides, eyes open now, fully present. She had felt the shift the moment the alarms cut off, not relief, but pressure. The kind that came when someone powerful realized they were exposed and decided to move. That was always the dangerous moment. Across the corridor, Agent Carla Brooks lowered her radio slowly. Her jaw was tight, her posture alert in a way that said instincts were firing faster than protocol. "You planned this," Brooks said, not accusing, confirming. Briana didn't answer immediately. She watched two officers argue quietly near a sealed stairwell. One was angry, the other was scared. Both were guessing. "I planned for a reaction," Briana said finally. "I never planned for behavior. That's unpredictable." Brooks studied her face. There was no triumph there, no satisfaction, just focus. "You're not a civilian," Brooks said. Briana met her eyes. "Not today." They moved. Not running. Running drew attention. They walked with purpose through corridors thick with confusion. People stepped aside without knowing why. On the second floor, Master Chief Garrett joined them, breath steady despite the stairs. He didn't ask questions anymore. He trusted the feeling that had kept him alive longer than most of his peers. "She's leading," he told Brooks quietly. "That's all I need to know." In the IT control room, Dylan Chase sat rigid at his station, fingers hovering uselessly over the keyboard. The system was still active, but not in the way it should be. Access attempts were spiking, internal credentials, old ones, ones that shouldn't exist. When Briana entered, he looked up like someone seeing gravity explained. "You," he said before he could stop himself. She didn't correct him. "What are you seeing?" she asked. Dylan swallowed. "Someone's pulling data from the legacy logistics system, the one that was decommissioned years ago. It's supposed to be isolated, air-gapped." "It is," Briana said, "unless you know where the bridge was hidden." Dylan stared at her. "You know." "I designed it," she said calmly, "for emergencies no one wanted to admit could happen." Garrett felt the weight of that sentence settle in his chest. He had served under planners, strategists, people who thought 3 steps ahead. She thought in systems. "Who's accessing it?" Brooks asked. Dylan typed, hands shaking now from adrenaline instead of fear. A username appeared. Not a name, a ghost. "Ghost Harbor Alpha 7. Briana exhaled slowly. "There you are," she murmured. The room stilled. "That account was never meant to be used," she continued. "It exists to test integrity. If someone activates it, they're already inside deeper than they should be." Brooks' voice dropped. "So whoever this is, they're panicking." "Yes," Briana said, "and trying to clean house." They moved again. 3 floors up, a server room sat at the end of a long corridor. 2 guards stood outside, nervous, unsure, waiting for orders that weren't coming. One stepped forward, area restricted. Garrett's voice cut through the tension like a blade. "Son, that room is compromised. You can step aside now, or explain later why you didn't." The guard hesitated, then moved. Inside, the room hummed with machinery. Racks of servers glowed softly in the dim light. And at the far end, crouched beside an open panel, was Chief Ramirez, Dylan's supervisor. The man who had patted his shoulder that morning and told him not to worry. Ramirez froze when he saw them. Briana didn't shout, she didn't draw a weapon, she just said his name. "Chief." Ramirez's shoulders slumped like a structure losing its last support. "It wasn't supposed to be like this," he said weakly. "I was told." "Everyone tells themselves something," Briana interrupted gently. "That's how they live with it." Brooks cuffed him swiftly. Garrett disconnected the laptop, careful, precise. Files streamed across the screen. Logs, transactions, communications. "A trail." "Who ordered you?" Brooks demanded. Ramirez shook his head, eyes wet. "I never met them directly. Messages, instructions, payments." Briana knelt so they were eye level. "You sold access," she said quietly. "Not weapons, not routes. Access. And access gets people killed faster than bullets." Ramirez broke. They escorted him out. As they did, the building shifted again, but this time upward. Authority arrived not with noise but weight. 3 senior figures entered the courtroom minutes later. Their presence silenced every room they passed through. When Briana stepped forward and one of them saluted her, the air seemed to collapse inward. Not because of the salute, but because of what it implied. Rank restored. Identity acknowledged. Truth catching up. Faces changed, some flushed with shame, some with fear, some with awe. The Admiral who had mocked her earlier wasn't there. He was already trying to leave. They caught him before he reached the highway. Briana watched as he was escorted back, hands restrained, expression carefully blank. "You think this ends it?" he asked her as he passed. No, she said honestly, but it stops you. That night, long after the building emptied, Briana returned to her desk. Same gray blazer, same quiet corner. Dylan brought her coffee without asking. Why stay invisible, he asked softly, after all this? She looked at the glowing city beyond the window. Because loud things draw fire, she said, and quiet things last. She opened a new folder on her laptop. Phase 2. Some wars weren't fought with weapons. Some were fought with patience. And sometimes, the strongest people in the room were the ones everyone underestimated first. Why did the truth feel heavier once it was finally spoken? The courtroom had emptied, but the echo stayed. Not sound, memory. Briana stood alone near the back wall, hands clasped behind her, eyes fixed on the polished wood where she'd stood accused only hours earlier. The room felt smaller now, not because people were gone, but because the lie had collapsed. Being invisible had been easier. When no one expected anything from her, she could move freely. Listen, watch, build the map in her head without interference. Now every glance carried weight, curiosity, respect, suspicion. Those were dangerous things. Vice Admiral Cortez had left with a promise of support and a warning wrapped in courtesy. NCIS had taken over the evidence. Inspector General teams were already spinning up task forces with acronyms that would outlive the people running them. Everyone else thought the story had reached its climax. Briana knew better. She returned to the logistics office after sunset, when the base softened into shadows and routine. The fluorescent lights hummed the same way they always had. The desk was still tucked into the corner. The coffee machine still leaked a little when you poured too fast. She sat down and exhaled. 4 in. 4 hold. 4 out. Her hands trembled for the first time that day. Not fear, not relief. Exhaustion. 18 months undercover. Every insult absorbed. Every joke swallowed. Every assumption allowed to stand because correcting it too early would have ruined everything. The mind can endure a lot when it knows the cost has meaning. But the body keeps score. She rolled her shoulders, feeling the old ache near her left arm. Shrapnel didn't care about rank. It stayed with you long after people forgot why it was there. A knock came at the partition. She didn't look up. "You can come in." Master Chief Garrett stepped through, cap tucked under his arm. He didn't speak right away, just stood there, respectful in a way that wasn't about hierarchy. "I've been trying to figure something out," he said finally. She waited. "In 32 years, he continued, I've met a lot of operators, loud ones, quiet ones, smart ones, reckless ones, but the ones who last, they all have one thing in common." She glanced up. "What's that?" "They don't need to be seen." She nodded once. Garrett shifted his weight. "You could have stopped this months ago, exposed Donovan earlier, taken your win." "Yes," she said, "but not the network." He frowned. "So you let it go on." "I let them think they were winning," she corrected gently. "People reveal more when they're comfortable." Garrett studied her face. That kind of patience costs something. Her eyes softened. "It already has." After he left, she opened her laptop. Encrypted folders bloomed across the screen. Financial pathways, shell companies, procurement anomalies that didn't show up unless you knew how to ask the system the wrong questions. Anchor 7 wasn't a person. It was a role. A broker, a shadow, someone who never touched the weapons, never logged into the systems directly, someone who let others do the dirty work while they stayed clean. And someone who had noticed her. The email sat unopened at the top of her inbox. No sender. No subject. Just an attachment. She opened it. A photo of the JAG building, taken from across the street. Morning light. Her walking up the steps, coffee in one hand, files in the other. Time-stamped. The message beneath it was short. "We see you." She didn't react. She saved the file, tagged it, added it to the growing web. Fear was useless now. It didn't sharpen. It only slowed you down. The next morning, the base buzzed with rumor. Some saluted her openly. Others looked away. A few watched too closely, trying to reconcile the woman they'd ignored with the officer they'd misjudged. Dylan approached her desk hesitantly. "Commander," he said. The word still felt strange in his mouth. "Yes." "I traced Sentinel Holdings," he said quietly. "It's bigger than Ironclad, way bigger." She closed the folder she'd been reviewing. How big? 12 shell companies, 3 continents, defense contracts, logistics consulting, shipping intermediaries, all legally separated, all connected financially. "Names?" she asked. 2 retired generals, Dylan said. 1 former procurement official, all technically civilians now. She nodded. That tracked. Power didn't disappear when people took off uniforms. It just learned new disguises. Later that day, Lieutenant Foster requested a meeting. He looked different, quieter, like someone whose certainty had been broken and not yet replaced. "I reviewed every assumption I made," he said. "Every shortcut, every moment I thought this is obvious." She listened. "I don't know if I can undo the damage," he continued, "but I want to help fix it." She met his eyes. "Then don't chase guilt, chase truth. It's harder and it lasts." He nodded. That evening, alone in her apartment, Briana stood by the window watching the city settle into night. Lights flickered on. Cars moved like veins carrying quiet urgency. This was the part people never saw. Not the courtroom, not the arrests. The waiting. The knowing that every step forward narrowed the space behind you. That once you were visible, you stayed visible. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. "Tower 4 sends regards. Anchor 7 is watching." She deleted the message without replying. They always wanted a reaction, proof they still had control. She wouldn't give it to them. She sat at her desk and opened a fresh document. Phase 2. Not revenge. Not exposure for its own sake. Containment. Disruption. Protection. Because the people at the end of those supply lines weren't names on a screen. They were faces, voices, calls that never came home. She closed her eyes. 4 in. 4 hold. 4 out. Invisible had kept her safe. But being seen, truly seen, might be what finished the job. And if dignity had taught her anything, it was this. Some battles are loud because they want witnesses. The most important ones are quiet. Why did the danger feel closer now, when everyone finally knew her name? The first rule Briana had learned in the shadows was simple. Once people start recognizing you, you stop being safe. The base felt different the next morning. Not louder, not quieter, just aware. Doors opened a little faster when she approached. Conversations paused, then resumed in lower tones. A few salutes came late, awkward, like people weren't sure whether they were allowed to give them. Visibility had a cost. She moved through it anyway. At 600, she sat in a windowless briefing room with Agent Brooks, 2 analysts from NCIS, and a liaison from the Inspector General's office. Screens glowed with maps and timelines. Red dots connected ports, airfields, shipping hubs. Lines crisscrossed continents. The network wasn't collapsing. It was adapting. Sentinel Holdings froze 3 accounts overnight, one analyst said. Moved assets through a secondary shell in Cyprus. They're bleeding, but they're not dead. They won't be, Briana said. Not yet. Brooks glanced at her. You're certain Anchor 7 is still active? Briana nodded. They don't disappear when pressure hits. They pivot. That's how they survive. And how do we catch them? The IG liaison asked. Briana leaned forward, hands flat on the table. We don't chase them, we make them chase us. Silence followed. Brooks exhaled slowly. You're talking about bait again. I'm talking about leverage, Briana replied. Anchor 7 only moves when something threatens their control, money, information, or exposure. And you, Brooks said carefully, are now exposed. Briana didn't argue. That afternoon, she returned to the logistics office. Same desk, same chair, same quiet corner that smelled faintly of burnt coffee and toner. But something was wrong. Not obvious, not dramatic. Just off. Her chair had been adjusted, slightly, the way someone does when they sit briefly and forget to put it back. A folder on her desk was rotated a few degrees clockwise. Small things. She didn't touch anything. She walked to Dillon's station instead. Did anyone access my terminal? She asked quietly. Dillon checked logs, his face tightened. No authorized access. Unauthorized, she pressed. He hesitated. There was a ping, brief, masked, looked like system noise. It wasn't, Briana said. She returned to her desk, logged in, and ran a diagnostic she'd written years ago, one that scanned for activity designed to look invisible. A single line appeared. Mirror active. They were inside her workspace. Not stealing files, not copying data. Watching. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. You should have stayed invisible. Her pulse stayed steady, but something colder moved through her chest. They weren't threatening her mission. They were threatening her balance. That night she didn't go home. She drove instead. No destination, just motion. The city blurred past as she let the familiar rhythm of driving quiet her thoughts. Anchor 7 wanted her distracted, emotional, reactive. She wouldn't give them that either. At 2300, Brooks called. We intercepted chatter, she said. Not direct but close, someone asking about you specifically. Where? Briana asked. Private contractor circles, former officers, people who don't officially exist anymore. Briana closed her eyes briefly. They're deciding whether I'm worth eliminating. Brooks didn't respond immediately. We can put you under protection. Briana shook her head, even though Brooks couldn't see it. That confirms their fear, makes me less useful. You're not expendable, Brooks said firmly. Briana's voice softened. I know, that's why this works. The next morning, she attended a procurement review meeting she'd skipped dozens of times before. She sat in the back, took notes, said nothing. But she made sure to be seen. 2 days later, a leak surfaced. Not catastrophic, not clean. Just enough to suggest that Sentinel's financial pathways were being mapped by someone who understood them deeply. Anchor 7 responded within hours. A new message arrived on Briana's phone. Aren't you tired? She deleted it. Then another. You sacrificed your career once. Do you really want to do it again? That one stayed with her longer. Because it was true. She had lost everything once already. Rank, reputation, friends who stopped calling because it was easier to believe the official story than question it. She had rebuilt herself in silence. Now the silence was gone. That evening she sat alone in her apartment, lights off, city glow spilling in through the window. Her reflection stared back at her in the glass. Ignored. Mocked. Restored. Hunted. All versions of her, all true. Her phone rang. This time it wasn't unknown. It was a number she hadn't seen in years. She answered slowly. This line isn't secure. I know, came the reply, a familiar voice, older, tired. They wanted me to call you. Her chest tightened. You shouldn't be involved. I already am, the voice said. They asked questions about you, about Syria, about the convoy. Briana's jaw set. That's not coincidence, the voice continued. They're trying to see how close you are to the bodies. Briana closed her eyes. The convoy had been routine, logistics clean, routes rotated, everything done right. Except one detail had been sold. 3 men hadn't come home. She had attended the funerals quietly. No uniform, no speeches. Just guilt. "I won't let them do this again," she said. "I know," the voice replied. "Just don't do it alone." The line went dead. The next day, NCIS confirmed what she already knew. Someone had accessed sealed casualty reports connected to the ambush. Someone was digging backward. Anchor 7 wasn't just watching her. They were circling. In the briefing room, Brooks slammed her hand lightly against the table. They crossed a line. "They always do," Briana said. "Eventually." "Then we accelerate," Brooks said. "We force the confrontation." Briana shook her head. "Not yet, they're still measuring me." "Measuring for what?" Brooks asked. Briana met her eyes. "For how much I'm willing to lose." That night, Briana packed a small bag. Nothing dramatic. No weapons. Just clothes, a burner phone, and an old notebook with pages worn soft from years of planning. She paused at the door of her apartment. For a moment, just one, she considered what it would feel like to stop, to hand everything over, to let others finish it. Then she thought of the convoy, of laughter in a courtroom, of people who believed silence meant weakness. She turned off the light and closed the door behind her. Some people fight to be remembered. Others fight so no one else has to disappear. And as Anchor 7 tightened the net, Briana did something they hadn't expected. She stepped closer. Why did she feel calm only when everything was finally on the line? Briana stood in the departure terminal long before sunrise, watching people move with the careless certainty of those who believed tomorrow was guaranteed. Coffee cups, rolling bags, quiet arguments about seats and schedules. Normal life. She blended into it easily, too easily. Anchor 7 had always assumed she would stay inside the system. Meetings, briefings, secure rooms with cameras and witnesses. That was how people like them thought power worked. They underestimated motion. Her burner phone vibrated once. "Gate changed, you're being watched." She didn't look up, didn't change pace. She adjusted her jacket instead, like any other traveler responding to cold air. The message confirmed what she already knew. They were close. The flight took her west, then farther south. No direct lines, no patterns, every step chosen to look accidental, to feel inefficient. By the time she landed, she was tired, but clarity lived inside that exhaustion. When the mind stops racing, truth gets louder. A rental car waited. No reservation, no name, just keys left where they were told. She drove into the desert as the sun climbed, washing the land in pale gold. The road stretched long and empty, like it had been waiting. Anchor 7 didn't operate from basements or war rooms. They operated from places no one questioned. The compound looked harmless enough from a distance. A logistics consultancy, training facilities, private airstrip used mostly for corporate travel. Legitimate. That was always the most dangerous word. She parked far enough away to walk the last mile. Gravel crunched under her boots. Wind tugged at her jacket. Her breath slowed naturally, falling into the rhythm she trusted more than thought. 4 in. 4 hold. 4 out. She wasn't armed. That was intentional. Inside the main building, glass walls reflected sunlight and confidence. People moved with purpose, badges swinging, voices low but assured. No one stopped her. She belonged there. At the reception desk, a woman smiled professionally. "May I help you?" Briana placed a slim data drive on the counter. "I'm here to return something," she said. The smile faltered. Minutes later, she was escorted into a conference room, not restrained, not threatened. Respected. 3 men waited inside, all older, all calm, all wearing the kind of quiet authority that didn't need uniforms. One of them spoke first. "You've caused us inconvenience," he said. Briana took a seat without being invited. "You caused graves." A pause. Another man leaned forward. "You're emotional. That makes you predictable." She shook her head. "No, emotion makes me honest. That's why you miscalculated." The first man folded his hands. "You want justice." "I want containment," Briana replied. "Justice implies an ending. This doesn't end, it gets managed." A faint smile crossed his face. "You think you can manage us?" "I already am," she said. She slid her phone across the table and tapped the screen. A live feed appeared. NCIS agents moving through offices. Servers being seized. Accounts frozen in real time. The men's expressions didn't change, but something tightened behind their eyes. "You leak selectively," one said. "Forced us to consolidate." "Yes," Briana replied. "People reveal their core when they think they're threatened." "And you think this survives without consequences?" the first man asked. Briana met his gaze steadily. "I think the consequences finally reach the right people." Outside, helicopters approached, distant at first, then unmistakable. One man exhaled slowly. "You could have been one of us." Briana stood. "I already chose who I am." They didn't stop her as she walked out. They didn't need to. By the time she reached the edge of the property, the sound of rotors filled the sky. Dust kicked up, shouts followed, orders, confusion. The machine had turned. She kept walking. Hours later, she sat on the hood of the rental car, watching the sun sink toward the horizon. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was Brooks. "It's done," Brooks said. Her voice carried relief and something heavier. "Not all of them, but enough." Briana closed her eyes. "Thank you," Brooks added, "for trusting us." Briana looked out at the desert, endless and quiet. "I didn't," she said honestly. "I trusted the work." Back at the base days later, things felt quieter. No applause, no ceremony, just subtle shifts, safer systems, cleaner lines, fewer shadows where corruption used to live. She returned to her desk. Same chair, same hum of lights. Dylan left a coffee without a word. Garrett passed by and nodded once. That was enough. She opened her notebook and wrote a final line beneath the last plan. Visibility achieved, risk accepted. Then she closed it. Because the work didn't require her name anymore. Some people measure success by recognition. Others measure it by absence. By the disasters that never happen. The names that never appear on memorial walls. The laughter that never echoes in rooms where it shouldn't. Briana sat quietly, hands folded, breathing steady. Dignity didn't need to be loud. It simply acted. Why did the silence feel earned, only after everything else was stripped away? The base woke slowly that morning like it always had, engines starting in the distance, boots on concrete, radios murmuring fragments of other people's urgency. But for Briana, something had shifted. Not outside, inside. She walked the familiar path past the flagpole, past the building where she had once stood accused, past offices where people now nodded with recognition instead of dismissal. None of it stirred pride. None of it felt like victory. It felt complete. She paused at the edge of the training field, watching a group of young recruits run drills in uneven lines. They were loud, overconfident, certain they understood what strength looked like. She had been like that once. Before patience. Before loss. Before learning that endurance wasn't loud, it was lonely. Her phone buzzed softly. A message from Brooks. Oversight signed off. Anchor 7 officially dismantled. No loose threads we can see. Briana stared at the screen for a long moment. "No loose threads" was a comforting phrase, also a dangerous one, because experience taught her that threads didn't vanish, they just receded. Still, this one mattered. Lives would continue because of it. She typed a brief reply. "Good work, protect the systems, not the reputations." She slipped the phone back into her pocket and kept walking. Inside her office, the air felt still, almost respectful. The desk was clean, the computer dark, no hidden pings, no mirrors watching from behind the code. For the first time in months, no one was tracking her breathing. She sat down slowly. The quiet pressed in, not threatening, not hollow, but heavy with memory. Faces surfaced uninvited. The convoy driver, who had joked about bad coffee minutes before the blast. The analyst who'd warned her too late. The quiet funerals where she stood in the back, nameless by design. She had carried those moments like weight plates no one else could see. Today they felt lighter. Not gone. Integrated. A knock came at the door. She didn't look up. "Come in." Dylan stepped inside, uncertain as always, holding a manila envelope. "They reassigned me," he said. "Oversight Division, Systems Integrity." She smiled faintly. "That's good." "I wanted to say," he struggled for words. "Before all this, I thought courage meant charging in, being bold, loud." He hesitated, then continued. "Now I think it looks more like staying still when everything tells you to run." Briana met his eyes. "Courage changes shape as you grow. Don't let anyone lock it into one definition." He nodded, visibly steadier than when she'd first met him. "Thank you for letting me see that." After he left, she opened the envelope he'd handed her. Inside was a single document. Voluntary reassignment approval. No demotion. No exile. No punishment. An offer. Advisory role, systems resilience, behind the scenes, no spotlight. Exactly where she belonged. She leaned back in her chair and closed her eyes. 4 in. 4 hold. 4 out. Later that evening, she stood on her balcony as the sun dipped below the skyline. The city exhaled. Lights came on one by one, like stars remembering their place. Her phone rang again. This time, she answered without hesitation. Garrett's voice came through, steady as ever. Retirement paperwork finally went through. "Congratulations," she said. He chuckled softly. "Funny thing, I thought stepping away would feel like loss. Turns out it feels like trust. Trust that someone else is watching the angles now." She understood what he meant. "Take care of yourself," he added. "I always do," she replied, and for the first time it felt true. When the call ended, she stayed where she was, listening to the distant sounds of a city that would never know her name, and never needed to. That was the point. Weeks passed. The systems held. No new leaks, no sudden anomalies, no frantic late-night calls. Briana worked quietly, methodically. She corrected weaknesses before they could be exploited, strengthened processes no one noticed until they saved someone years later. Occasionally, someone would recognize her in a hallway, ask questions, seek advice. She gave it when needed, then stepped back into the background. Not erased. Positioned. One afternoon, she returned to the courtroom, not for duty but closure. It was empty, sunlight streaming through tall windows, dust floating gently in the air. She stood where she had once been mocked. Listened to the silence. It didn't echo anymore. She thought about the Admiral, the brokers, the men who believed authority meant immunity. They had all underestimated the same thing. Not her strength. Her restraint. She turned and walked out without looking back. That night, alone at her desk, she wrote one final note in her notebook. Not a plan, not a warning. A reminder. The loudest threat is often the least dangerous. Watch the quiet ones, including yourself. She closed the book and placed it in a drawer she rarely opened. Outside, the base lights dimmed to night cycle. Somewhere, a young recruit struggled through training. Somewhere else, a family slept safely, unaware of how close chaos had once come. That was enough. Briana sat still, breathing even hands steady. She didn't need applause. She didn't need titles spoken aloud. She didn't need the story told with her name attached. Because sometimes, dignity doesn't raise its voice. It doesn't demand to be seen. It waits. It endures. And when the moment comes, it acts. And then it steps quietly back into the dark, leaving the world safer than it found it.